Welcome to our channel, Million Dollars Made Easy. On this channel, we run numbers for you and help answer questions like the following. This individual is 62 years old. He has $720,000 saved. His monthly expenses are $5,500. So when he runs the numbers, he sees that's a 9.17% withdrawal rate, which is way above the 4% rate that's been used for decades. It's even well above Dave Ramsey's 8% rule. So there's no way he can retire, right? At first glance, it does not look possible. Let me show you one of the spreadsheets we use on this channel to show you how the numbers work out. Here's a 720,000. We're doing a 60-40 asset allocation, and he figures he needs 5,500 a month. And if we run the numbers using the returns for the S&P 500, which is what we do on this channel, we simply project ahead what similar returns might do for you in the future. If we use these numbers, and they're anything like they've done for the last 100 years, this is what he would have after 10 years. He'd have 94% of the time using numbers for the last 100 years, he would have money left. But just 10 years later, he's got an 84% failure rate. Here's the actual graph of using the numbers from the last 100 years. It looks like a disaster. In fact, if you go out 30 years, 100% failure rate. So what in the world do we need to take into account? If you just run just these numbers and do a Monte Carlo simulation and don't take into account some of these other issues, that's the problem that you're going to have because it's a 9.17%. What happens if he goes online and figures out he's going to get $1,800 in Social Security? Watch how the withdrawal percentage drops. Now it's down to 6.17, a little bit better, in fact, quite a bit better. Still a ways away from the 4% rule, but we want to go ahead and update this. And what this does is, again, updates the numbers for every single year for the last 100 years. And let's see how this number works. This is the failure rate after 20 years using the numbers for last. Now we're down to 22%. Just taking into account that Social Security made that much difference, it took us from a 9.17% withdrawal rate down to a 6.17. But again, a lot of people might not be comfortable with this kind of a graph. It looks really good 78% of the time, but who knows, those 22% of the time is kind of pesky. So what do you do differently? Again, we're looking at a 60-40 asset allocation. What happens if you change your asset allocation a little bit? Let's see if that affects this 22%, because we want to get that down there, preferably under 10%, so you'd have a 90% success rate. So we're going to go to the 70-30 asset allocation just to show you the difference here. Going to leave a little bit more in the S&P 500. Now we're down to a 17% failure rate, which is a little bit more reasonable. Now you got 83% of the time you're going to have these kind of funds. This is $1 million. This is $2 million. Remember, you're starting out with $720,000. What else could we do? Let's be realistic. What normally happens when you first retire, they're called the go-go years. And so we're going to plan on spending more in the go-go years, that first 10 years. The second decade, you kind of step back a little bit, don't spend quite as much. So what we're going to do, we're just going to make some simple changes here, and we're going to go from an 84% failure rate, not taking into account Social Security. Watch what happens when we have we're just going to stay this. First decade, you go ahead and spend the 6.17 or withdraw that. The second decade, you're going to take out a little bit less, 10% less, because maybe when you're in your 70s, you're going to spend a little bit less. I'm 73. I know we're spending less than we did when we were in our 60s. So let's go ahead and run these numbers and see if this percentage has dropped much. We're just doing little changes to show you that maybe that you really can retire with these kind of funds, even though you figure you need 5,500, but you need to take into account Social Security. Now we're down to a 10% failure rate. Isn't that awesome? Now, what's one more thing we can do? Again, now we got a 90% success rate. The only problem seems to be during the Depression years and during the decade of the 2000s, which again, these were the two problem decades in the last 100 years. 1930s, the Depression years, and also the 2000s, where we had 3 down years and down 37. So that's why we have an issue during the Depression years, and right the rest of the time, we're doing just fine. But watch what happens if we just do one more simple thing. How about after a negative year, you don't give yourself a COLA? Right now, we're giving them 3% COLA. What happens after a negative year? The very next year, you don't take a COLA. You just continue to have what you did before. For example, we had 1957 numbers, and we had a down year and 3,700 a month coming out, you next year you'd stay at that. Yes, it'd be a little bit painful not to have your amount coming out inflate a little bit, but watch how this changes this. I'm going to go ahead and update this. Still, we're at this 6.17% withdrawal rate. That's what we're trying to do in this spreadsheet, showing you that it's not as simple as it might look when you run some initial numbers, especially you don't want to forget about Social Security. Now we're down to a 7% failure rate. Again, the graph's looking even better. Still, we got the depression type years and a little bit around the year 2000, but now we've got a 93% success rate. And what's really nice, even the 30-year success rate is very beneficial. Look at that, only an 8.5% failure rate and 91.5% success rate. But what happens if we just do one more thing? What if you don't really need $5,500 a month? Let's say you can get by with $5,200 a month. See how that changes? It went from a 6.17% withdrawal rate down to a 5.67. Let's see if that helps much here. A little bit less taking out. See if we can get it down to maybe 4% or less. I haven't run the numbers up 4% at a time. Now you got a 96% success rate. See what we did? We remembered to put in Social Security. That's so crucial because if you didn't have that, you had a withdrawal rate of 9.17%. We went from a 60-40 asset allocation to a 70-30, which helped a little bit. And then we also didn't take COLAs after negative years, and look how that affected it. And also, we didn't take quite as much out the second decade of retirement. We pretty much just stayed with that for the third decade of retirement. So that's what we do on this channel is we set up all kinds of spreadsheets to help you see what your numbers might be, to see that maybe this isn't such an impossible situation as it might look like. When you run the numbers, if you're just looking at these numbers, that's too high of a withdrawal rate. But if you take into account Social Security and do some of these other adjustments, that's what we can get these numbers down. Again, folks, we're all on this financial journey together. All of us want to end up with a comfortable retirement. We especially don't want to work any longer than we need to. And I think if you just see your numbers worked out like we do on this channel with these different spreadsheets, that can really help ease that concern to know that, yeah, you probably can retire with these kind of funds if you take into account all these different variables, Social Security being the big one, but also maybe changing your asset allocation, and especially maybe change your COLA after negative years. And this is the kind of numbers you can have, seeing that, yes, you really can retire and have a success rate after 20 years of 96.3%, and after 30 years of 95.8%. That's what we do on this channel. Please consider subscribing. Please share this channel with others. Let people know about this channel. Let them know that we run numbers for them to help them see where they might be. Please like the video, and thanks so much for watching.